On the edge of a new life, a young boy faces challenges he never dared to dream of before. Kwame, once a lonely child beneath a mango tree, now steps into an unfamiliar world where everything is new, from textbooks to relationships he's never known. A big exam, a rare opportunity, and a life-changing decision are waiting ahead. But can he overcome the fears, loneliness, and the scars of his past to rise and change his life? Join us as we follow Kwame's story, filled with drama, resilience, and courage in his journey to transformation. Before we embark on this exciting journey, don't forget to subscribe to receive exciting, inspiring, and dramatic episodes from us. Follow and witness Kwame's spectacular steps on the road to conquering his dreams. The sun was barely visible beyond the horizon, casting a dim orange glow over the desolate landscape. Kwame sat on the cold earth beneath a solitary mango tree, its twisted branches reaching toward the sky like the hands of a ghostly figure. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it the distant sound of the waves gently crashing against the shore of the nearby lake. But Kwame wasn't listening to the wind or the water. He was listening to something deeper, something that only he could hear: the quiet desperation of his own heart. He was alone. The village around him was silent. The people long gone to their homes or fields, or perhaps just distant memories themselves. The old graveyard that loomed just beyond the tree, with its weathered tombstones leaning at odd angles, seemed to belong to another time, another life, a time when there had been laughter and voices, a time when the world hadn't been so unforgiving. Kwame knew no other life. His life had begun beneath this very tree, in the shadow of the dead. His parents were nothing more than ghosts in his mind. He couldn't remember their faces, their voices, only the vague sense of a warm hand once held in his own, the faint murmur of lullabies sung under the breath of a woman he could barely recall. There was no grave for them. They had simply disappeared, swept away by the winds of fate, leaving him behind. Now all he had was this tree. He looked up at its broad, leafy canopy, the one place he felt even the faintest connection to the world. The mango tree had witnessed it, all the quiet moments of his life, the painful solitude, the brief glimpses of a future he could never quite touch. He had spent countless hours here, and each time he returned, he left something behind. A small offering, a token of his thoughts. A leaf. With his small hands, Kwame took another leaf from the tree's branches, his fingers grazing the rough texture of its surface, as though trying to pull the words from the very fibers of the plant. The leaf felt cool to the touch, but it was more than just a leaf. It was his canvas, his only canvas. Carefully, Kwame took a piece of charred wood from a nearby fire pit, using it as his pen. He wrote in the delicate script he had taught himself words that no one would ever read, words that were meant for no one but him. The diary of his soul was not written on paper. It was written in leaves, the only medium he had ever known. He wrote of his loneliness, of his dreams, of his fear. He wrote of the many nights he had spent lying on his back, staring at the stars above, wondering if they too felt as lost as he did. His thoughts spilled onto the leaf like ink, his emotions twisting and turning in a dance that only he could understand. Every letter he formed, every word he wrote, was an attempt to capture something that eluded him: hope. Hope for a world beyond the graveyard. Hope for a life that wasn't defined by his solitude. Once he had written his words, he pressed the leaf into the earth beneath the mango tree, where the roots stretched deep into the soil. He wasn't sure what happened to them after that. Did the leaves vanish into the ground, swallowed by the earth? Or did they drift away, carried off by the wind into the unknown? It didn't matter. He didn't need to know. For Kwame, the act of writing, the act of placing his soul into the ground beneath that tree, was enough. The wind rustled through the leaves once more, as if responding to his thoughts. Kwame stared at the small mound of earth where his leaf had disappeared, his heart heavy. He felt it in his chest, the weight of his isolation, the crushing burden of having no one, of being no one. It was like a dark cloud that had settled over him, and no matter how many leaves he wrote, no matter how many dreams he buried under the tree, the cloud never lifted. The village seemed so far away, as if it existed in a different time, a different world. The people there had their lives, their families, their stories. And Kwame, he had nothing. He had only his thoughts and his dreams, fleeting and fragile like the leaves he wrote on. He was part of the earth now, buried beneath it, like the very leaves he pressed into the soil. But that too was part of the routine. It had always been part of the routine. The feeling of nothingness, the constant ache of absence, of being a shadow in a world filled with light. Some days were worse than others. Some days the loneliness felt like it would consume him whole. The sound of footsteps in the distance pulled him from his reverie. His head jerked up, but he didn't see anyone. It was only the wind playing tricks, only his mind trying to convince him that someone, anyone, might be approaching. But there was no one. Not today. Not tomorrow. He sighed and ran his hand through his unkempt hair, his fingers brushing against the skin of his forehead. The sun was beginning to set, the last traces of light fading from the sky. Kwame had no place to go, no one to call. The mango tree had become his refuge, his only companion in a world that seemed indifferent to his existence. But still, there was something about the tree. It stood there, unmoving, its roots deep in the ground. It didn't care if he was alone, if he had no family. It didn't care if he was just a boy, writing words no one would ever read. The tree in all its silent wisdom remained. It had witnessed the passage of time, the seasons changing, the years slipping by. And Kwame, in his small way, was part of that cycle. He was a part of the earth, a part of something bigger than himself, even if he couldn't see it. And so he sat there under the mango tree, his mind drifting into the twilight. The darkness crept in slowly, like a blanket falling over the land. He could hear the occasional rustle of the leaves, above the soft murmur of the wind, the distant sound of the lake's waves. Everything was quiet. Everything was still. But inside him, a storm raged. The storm of a boy who had never known the warmth of a family, who had never known the love of a parent, who had never known what it meant to belong. He placed another leaf in the ground, another letter to the sky. Another hope buried deep within the earth, another piece of him gone. But maybe, just maybe, the wind would carry it away. Maybe someone somewhere would hear his words. Or perhaps the tree itself would remember. For now, all he had was the night, and the quiet, and the endless longing for something he couldn't name. The sky had darkened without warning. What had started as a gentle breeze turned into a fierce wind that howled through the trees, shaking their branches violently. Kwame stood under the mango tree, gripping the trunk as the first drops of rain began to fall. The air was thick with tension, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The storm was coming, and it was coming fast. Kwame knew the signs well. He had seen storms like this before. The wind howled louder now, tearing at the tree's branches, snapping them like brittle twigs. The sky overhead was turning a deep, angry shade of gray. He had no shelter, no place to go. The mango tree, which had always been his refuge, was now a prison. Its branches swayed under the onslaught of the storm, its leaves whipped away like forgotten memories. But still Kwame remained where he was rooted to the earth, watching as the chaos unfolded around him. The rain began to pour down in sheets, the water hammering against the ground with a ferocity that seemed determined to erase everything in its path. Kwame's thoughts raced. The leaf. His letter. The last one he had written and buried just yesterday. It was underneath the tree, hidden beneath the earth, a part of him left behind in that secret space. He could feel the storm pressing down on him, each gust of wind, a reminder of his isolation. The letter he had written, the words he had poured his soul into, were at risk of being lost. Was it even possible for something so fragile to survive a storm like this? As the wind picked up, it began to tear through the graveyard nearby, the tombstones rattling against each other, as if trying to escape the fury of the heavens. Kwame's heart raced. He had to act. He couldn't let the storm destroy his last connection to the world he had built, to the words that were the only proof he existed. With a burst of determination, he dropped to his knees, scrambling to dig into the earth beneath the tree. The rain was relentless, soaking him through, but he didn't care. His fingers dug furiously at the soil, desperate to find the leaf. His hands were slick with mud and water, but he pressed on his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All he could focus on was that small piece of paper buried beneath the dirt. His last piece of himself. Suddenly the wind shifted, and with it came a fierce gust that tore through the tree's branches, sending a cascade of leaves and debris into the air. Kwame shielded his face, squinting against the barrage of rain and wind. Then, as if in slow motion, he saw it. A single leaf carried by the wind, fluttering through the air. His heart skipped a beat. The letter. The wind had caught it. With a surge of panic, Kwame lunged forward, stretching out his hand toward the leaf, desperate to catch it, before it was lost forever. The rain lashed against his face, his eyes stinging as he reached. But it was too late. The wind carried the leaf out of his reach, sending it spiraling toward the distant horizon. Kwame fell to his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The leaf was gone. The letter was gone. His last connection to the world, his hope, was carried away by the storm. He stared after it, his hands trembling, feeling the weight of the loss like a physical ache in his chest. But just as the hopelessness began to sink in, something caught his eye. It was another leaf, twisted and torn by the storm, but this one wasn't fluttering away into the distance. It was stuck, caught on the edge of the tree's trunk. With trembling hands, Kwame reached out and plucked it free. For a moment, he didn't move. The storm raged around him, but the leaf in his hand was calm. It was different from the one he had written on. This one was damp, torn by the wind, but it was still here. It had survived. Somehow, it had survived. Kwame held the leaf up to his face, his heart pounding. The words on the leaf weren't his. They were strange, foreign, but they felt familiar. They felt important. He stared at the ink that had somehow survived the storm. The letters were scrawled in an elegant, careful hand. There was no doubt in his mind this was a message. A letter. But not from him. Not from anyone he had known. The writing was too refined, too different. The rain slowed, and the storm began to pass, leaving behind a silence that felt almost unnatural after the chaos. Kwame turned the leaf over, trying to understand. There was something about the words that seemed to call out to him, a pull that he couldn't explain. It wasn't just the message itself, but the way it was written. The words spoke of hope, of resilience, of strength. They were filled with a deep understanding of life, of hardship, and of dreams. It was as if the writer had seen the world through the same eyes Kwame had. Suddenly a voice broke through the silence. "Are you all right, boy?" Kwame's head snapped up. There, standing at the edge of the graveyard, was an older man, tall and imposing, his clothes soaked from the rain. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp but kind. He had a presence about him, something that immediately made Kwame feel both wary and curious. The man stepped closer, his gaze falling to the leaf in Kwame's hand. For a moment there was silence between them. The only sound the soft patter of the remaining rain against the ground. "You found it, didn't you?" the man said softly, his voice carrying an unspoken weight. Kwame's heart skipped a beat. How could this stranger know about the letter? His eyes flicked back to the leaf in his hand, and for the first time he felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of connection. Who are you, Kwame?" asked his voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled a knowing smile. "I'm a professor. I come to this graveyard often to think, to remember." and sometimes to find things. Kwame blinked confused. Find things? The professor nodded, glancing at the leaf in his hand. Things that belong to someone. Things that have been lost. Kwame's mind raced. Could this be? Was this the moment his life would change? Could this man, a stranger, be the one who understood, who would listen? The professor knelt beside him, his eyes never leaving the leaf. It seems we've both found something today. But perhaps it's not just the letter you've lost, boy. Perhaps there's something more you're meant to find. Kwame's heart beat faster as the professor's words sank in. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was alone. For the first time, he felt like something was changing, like someone might finally see him, truly see him for who he was. And as the storm passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, Kwame felt a glimmer of hope, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. This man, this stranger, had found him, and perhaps in doing so, he had found the key to something greater than just survival. For the first time in his life, Kwame didn't feel invisible. The morning after the storm, the world was still. The air hung thick with the scent of wet earth and damp leaves, the skies finally clear. But the aftermath of the chaos remained. The mango tree, its branches now bare of the leaves that had once shielded Kwame, stood like a sentinel witnessing the stillness that had followed the wild winds. The graveyard beyond, once a place of shadows, now seemed washed in the pale light of dawn. It was as though the storm had scrubbed the world clean, giving it a new beginning. Kwame woke early that morning, still tired, but strangely refreshed. The events of the night before lingered in his mind like a dream. The letter, the storm, the strange man with the professor's eyes. He had tried to forget the feeling of connection, the moment when he had realized he wasn't alone. But the feeling stuck with him, and it pulled him toward the tree once more. As he stood beneath the now silent mango tree, he absent-mindedly reached down to touch the patch of earth where he had buried his last letter. His fingers brushed the soil still soft from the rain, and his heart tightened. Was it gone? Had the wind carried it away forever, or had it too been lost to the storm? He didn't know. And then, just as he was about to give up, he heard footsteps. The sound was soft but unmistakable, and it drew Kwame's gaze up from the ground. Standing at the edge of the graveyard, slightly hesitating, was the professor. The same man from the day before. His presence was calm, almost reassuring. But there was an unfamiliar tension in the air, as if this moment were something Kwame had been waiting for, without even realizing it. The professor had a look of quiet determination in his eyes, his steps slow and deliberate as he approached. The rain had stopped, but he was still soaked, his clothes clinging to his body. But he didn't seem to mind. His focus was on Kwame, and there was something in his gaze that made the boy feel both nervous and intrigued. It was as if he was seeing him for the first time, truly seeing him. Kwame. The professor's voice was calm, but held a trace of something else, curiosity maybe, or wonder. It was the first time someone had spoken his name with such certainty. Kwame froze. He wasn't used to being addressed like this. His name was just a sound to him, something that had no weight, no meaning. It had never carried the significance it did now. And yet, there was something about the way the professor said it that made it feel important. Important, like it was the first time someone had called him for what he was not, for what he lacked. "Yes, sir," Kwame replied, his voice soft, unsure of how to respond. The professor smiled slightly, a small, almost imperceptible gesture as he took a few steps closer. "I'm Professor Jameson," he said, his voice gentle but his eyes sharp. "I'm the one who found your letter." Kwame felt a jolt of surprise, his stomach tightening. The letter. He hadn't expected anyone to find it, let alone come here to speak with him about it. His heart raced his thoughts, a flurry of confusion. Should he be afraid? Should he run? Or should he stay and face whatever this man had to say? The professor, sensing the boy's hesitation, spoke again. "I hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to speak with you. I found your writing quite remarkable, Kwame. It's rare to see someone so young express such deep understanding of life. Kwame stared at the professor, the words not fully sinking in. The storm still echoed in his mind, the leaf he had written on fluttering away in his memory like a distant thought. I just write what I feel, he muttered, unsure of what to say next. It's all I have. The professor nodded as if the boy's response made perfect sense. I understand. But what you have, it's something more than just words. What you wrote, it's the kind of thing that can change the world. The world needs voices like yours, Kwame. Your thoughts, your words, your story, they matter. The boy's heart pounded. The words felt like they were sinking into his bones, like they were resonating deep inside him, echoing through his very soul. He had always felt insignificant, lost beneath the weight of the world's indifference, and yet here was this stranger, this professor, telling him that his words mattered. Kwame swallowed hard, trying to make sense of it all. But I don't know how to make them matter, he said, his voice cracking with uncertainty. I'm just a boy. I don't have anything. No one to help me. The professor's eyes softened his expression, thoughtful. That's where you're wrong, Kwame. You have something the world needs. You have a voice, and it's louder than you think. The world doesn't need you to be perfect or to have everything in place. It needs you to be you. To speak your truth, no matter how small or quiet you think it is. Kwame stood there, still processing, his mind racing. It was a strange feeling, this thing the professor was offering him hope. It was the first time anyone had ever told him he had something of value. And it was both exhilarating and terrifying. The wind, now a mere whisper, rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of rain-soaked earth. It was a reminder of the storm, of the chaos, and yet it was now just a memory. A memory of something that had passed, something that had left room for something new, something that was beginning to take shape before his very eyes. Why are you here? Professor Kwame asked, his voice hesitant but curious. Why are you speaking to me? I'm just a boy who writes on leaves. The professor's expression softened further, and for the first time, Kwame saw the weight of years of experience in his eyes. I've seen many things in my life, Kwame. I've seen great minds, great artists, people with all the resources in the world. But what I've come to understand is that greatness doesn't come from having everything handed to you. It comes from within. It comes from the strength to keep going, even when no one is looking, even when no one believes in you. Kwame felt something stir within him. The words were like fire igniting something he hadn't even known was there. He had always felt small, insignificant, alone. But now there was a spark, a flicker of something greater, something possible. It was the faintest glimmer of hope, but it was enough. The professor continued, his voice gentle but firm. I see something in you, Kwame. Something special. And I want to help you nurture it. I want to give you the tools to turn your thoughts into something that can be heard by the world. If you'll let me. Kwame's breath caught in his throat. The offer was overwhelming, impossible to believe. How could this stranger, this professor, possibly see anything in him? He was just a boy living in the shadows of a graveyard, writing on leaves. But for the first time, Kwame felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just a boy writing in the dirt anymore. He was someone with a future, someone with a voice that could be heard. Kwame swallowed, his voice barely audible. I don't know if I can do it. The professor smiled again, his eyes filled with understanding. You don't have to know. You just have to try. The words hung in the air, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The wind had died down completely, and the sun was starting to peek through the clouds, casting a soft golden light on the graveyard. It was the first light Kwame had seen in a long time, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he had a chance. The professor reached out his hand, extended, waiting. And in that moment, Kwame understood. This was the beginning of something new, something that could change everything. He took the professor's hand, and for the first time, he didn't feel alone. Kwame stepped through the doorway, and a wave of unfamiliarity hit him like a cold gust of wind. The house, large and well-kept, was a stark contrast to the run-down hut he had called home for as long as he could remember. There was a warmth in the air here, a coziness that felt foreign, almost suffocating in its unfamiliarity. Everything inside the house was neat, well-organized, and full of things he had never seen before. Soft chairs, polished wooden tables, and shelves full of books and objects that were completely out of place in his old world. Professor Jameson led Kwame into the living room, his steps confident as he motioned to the space around them. "This is where you'll stay, Kwame," he said with a calm smile, gesturing to the inviting furniture. "Make yourself comfortable." Kwame stood frozen in the middle of the room, his eyes wide as he took in everything around him. The room was cozy, yet it felt overwhelmingly unfamiliar. A couch with soft cushions, a lamp casting a gentle glow over the room, paintings on the walls, it all seemed like something out of a dream. He had never lived in a place like this, and the thought of calling it home felt like a distant, unreachable possibility. His stomach tightened with uncertainty. "Here," Professor Jameson said, noticing the apprehension in Kwame's eyes, "this is your space now. The family is not home right now, but you will get to meet them soon." Kwame nodded, but the words didn't quite settle in his mind. The idea of living here in a place so different from his childhood home seemed so distant, almost impossible. His memories of the hut under the mango tree of the graveyard in the distance felt much more real to him than this fancy, well-lit room. He had spent most of his life in a small, cramped space, and this was just too much, too different. The professor led him toward a table in the corner of the room. On it, a stack of books and papers lay neatly organized. "I know it might be overwhelming right now, but in time, you'll find that this is your new home," the professor said. "We'll start with some basics. Don't worry. You don't have to learn everything all at once." Kwame followed him, his gaze lingering on the objects around him: the soft couch, the gleaming dishes in the kitchen, the smooth surface of a computer sitting on the table. He had never seen a machine like that before. It looked like something from another world, far beyond the life he had known. How do I use that?" Kwame asked, his voice hesitant as he pointed to the computer. The professor smiled, walking over to the desk and sitting down. "This is a computer, Kwame," he explained. "I'll show you how it works. Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it soon." Kwame stood in the doorway, still not fully comprehending what was happening. His entire life had been spent under the shade of a mango tree, with nothing but leaves to write on and the silence of the graveyard as his only companion. Now, in this strange house, everything felt overwhelming, almost like a foreign language. He didn't know how to start. How was he supposed to figure all of this out? The utensils in the kitchen were a mystery to him. The washing machine, how did that work? The very idea of using these things seemed impossible. Professor Jameson, noticing Kwame's hesitation, patted the seat next to him at the computer. "Come on, let's take it slow. First, we'll just look at the basics. We'll start with this." Kwame hesitated, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. But then he sat down beside the professor, his fingers trembling as he hovered over the mouse. It was different. The buttons, the screen, the way the cursor moved, everything about this machine seemed alien to him. But the professor was patient, guiding his hands through each motion, showing him how to click, how to open a file, how to use the keyboard. The more Kwame tried, the more confused he felt. Each step forward felt like a giant leap for a boy who had never seen a machine in his life. But then with each small step, something shifted. Kwame felt something stirring inside him, a desire to learn, a need to fit in, to become a part of this world, despite how overwhelming it felt. It was the kind of desire he had never felt before, not in the same way. It was like a flame that had been smoldering inside him, waiting for a spark. "Don't rush yourself, Kwame. We'll take it one day at a time," the professor said. noticing the unease in the boy's eyes. This may seem hard now, but remember, no one is born knowing everything. We all start somewhere. Kwame nodded silently, still unsure, but beginning to feel a faint sense of hope. Maybe this wasn't as impossible as he had thought. He didn't know how to use a computer or how to open the washing machine. But maybe, just maybe, he could learn. That night, after a simple dinner with the professor, which in itself felt strange but comforting, Kwame sat in his new room. The bed was soft beneath him, a luxury he had never known. He glanced out of the window, and for the first time since arriving, he allowed himself to think about the life he had left behind: the old house under the mango tree, the graveyard, the solitude. It was a strange feeling being here, in a house that felt so warm and inviting. But there was a part of him that still longed for the quiet of the night, for the comfort of the trees and the earth beneath him. He missed the simplicity of his old life. But at the same time, he knew that was a life he could never return to. That world was behind him now, and the world ahead of him was full of possibilities. Kwame looked at the window again, watching the light outside fade into the night. There was so much to learn, so much to understand. But in that moment, as he lay there, a new feeling began to grow within him, the feeling of hope. The hope that maybe this strange new life, filled with challenges and unknowns, could lead him to a place he had never imagined. The next morning, the professor introduced him to the kitchen, showing him how to prepare a simple meal. The stove, the utensils, the refrigerator. It was all so new to Kwame. He fumbled through the steps, but with the professor's guidance, he managed to cook a simple breakfast. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was part of something bigger, something worth striving for. The days passed, each one a little less overwhelming than the last. The more Kwame learned, the more he realized that he could change, that he could adapt. He wasn't just a boy lost in the world anymore. He was becoming someone new. Someone who could learn, who could fit in, who could thrive. And as the days turned into weeks, Kwame began to understand the true meaning of the word home. It wasn't just about a house or the things inside it. It was about the people, the connections, and the willingness to embrace the unfamiliar. For the first time, Kwame started to feel like he belonged. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was learning to live, and that in itself was a new beginning. Kwame's first few days in the professor's home felt like an endless stream of strange encounters, each one more overwhelming than the last. The comforts and conveniences of modern life that most people took for granted were foreign to him. Every task, no matter how small, seemed like a monumental challenge. One morning, the professor led Kwame into the kitchen and placed a pot in front of him. "Today you're going to cook breakfast," he said with a smile that didn't quite hide the underlying hope that this would be another step forward for Kwame. Kwame stared at the pot, then at the stove, and his heart sank. He had never cooked before. At home, food had come from the trees or the simple meals his mother had prepared using what little they had. A pot like this, with all its buttons and knobs, was like a puzzle too complex for his inexperienced mind. "You can do this, Kwame." The professor's voice was calm but firm. "It's just like everything else. Take it slow, step by step." Kwame stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. He had never faced something so ordinary, so mundane, that felt so impossible. How was it that something as simple as cooking was beyond his grasp? He could feel the tension rising in his chest, the same old fears creeping in, telling him that he wasn't enough, that he would never be able to fit into this world. The professor, noticing his hesitation, stepped closer. "Let's start with something simple. We'll make eggs and toast. I'll show you, and then you can try." Kwame watched as the professor cracked an egg into the pan, the sizzle of the oil filling the room. He observed every movement, the flick of the wrist, the way the egg yolk broke, how the professor flipped the toast with a quiet precision. Kwame could see the ease with which the professor moved through these tasks, his hands confident and sure. But for Kwame, each step was a struggle. When it was his turn to crack an egg, his hands trembled. The egg slipped from his fingers and cracked on the counter, spilling yellow yolk everywhere. A wave of shame washed over him. He felt like a child, like someone who should have known how to do this already, even though he hadn't. The professor, sensing Kwame's discomfort, didn't scold him. Instead, he smiled warmly and said, "It's okay. You're learning. Let's clean this up together." They spent the next several minutes cleaning the mess with the professor, patiently guiding him through the process. Slowly, Kwame started to feel less like a failure. He tried again, more cautiously this time. The second egg cracked more neatly, and with the professor's gentle coaching, the toast soon followed. Kwame set the plate down in front of them with a quiet pride. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. That afternoon, the professor took him into the laundry room. Again, Kwame stood there staring at the washing machine. He had never seen anything like it. Back home, clothes were washed by hand in a small stream near the village. The idea of loading clothes into a machine, pressing a button, and waiting for it to do all the work seemed almost like magic. His hands fumbled with the buttons, unsure of what to do. But the professor patiently walked him through the process. "You see, Kwame," the professor said as he set the washing machine to a gentle cycle, "it's all about understanding the rhythm of the machines. Just like you learn to cook, you'll learn how to do this." Kwame didn't respond immediately, but the words sunk in. For the first time, he wasn't feeling the pressure to get it perfect. He was learning, slowly, step by step. It didn't matter if it was cooking or doing laundry. The important thing was that he was trying, that he wasn't giving up. Still, the doubts lingered. The shame of not knowing these basic skills, the feeling that he was out of place, an outsider, haunted him. Every time he struggled with a simple task, he could feel those old insecurities rising again. He wasn't good enough. He wasn't capable. But there was something else inside him. Something small but growing hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this world wasn't beyond his reach. That each mistake, each failure was a stepping stone towards something better. The professor saw the frustration in Kwame's eyes one evening as they sat down to eat. It had been a day filled with more learning how to fold clothes, how to organize the refrigerator, how to use a phone. Each task was a battle, and each step forward felt like it came at the cost of a small piece of Kwame's dignity. He was tired physically and emotionally drained. "Kwame," the professor said softly, pushing a plate of food toward him. "I know this is hard. You've come a long way already, but I want you to remember something. You don't have to get everything right. You just have to try. Every time you try, you're getting better. You're learning." Kwame looked at the professor, his heart heavy with a mixture of gratitude and frustration. "But I don't know anything. I don't know how to fit in here. I don't know how to be like everyone else." The professor leaned back in his chair, his gaze gentle but firm. "Kwame, the only person you need to be is yourself. You've already shown me something extraordinary. You're willing to learn, to keep going, even when things feel impossible. That's more than most people ever do." The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time, Kwame felt a flicker of understanding. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about fitting in or doing everything the way others did. It was about trying, about learning, and about growing. Even if that meant failing. Even if that meant taking small, shaky steps forward. In the days that followed, Kwame began to notice something inside himself shifting. He wasn't perfect, far from it, but each time he tried something new, whether it was learning to make a simple meal or figuring out how to work the television remote, he felt a little bit stronger, a little more confident. The tasks, though still difficult, no longer seemed as impossible. One day, when he was making tea for himself, and the Professor, Kwame noticed something that made him smile. The kettle clicked off, and the steam rose from the cup just the way the professor had shown him. It wasn't a grand achievement, but it was his. And for the first time, he felt like he was beginning to fit into this strange new world. Not because he was perfect, but because he was trying. The relationship between Kwame and the professor continued to grow. In moments of frustration, the professor became a quiet guide, offering gentle encouragement and patient wisdom. He never rushed Kwame, never pushed him too hard, but always made sure that Kwame knew he was seen, that his efforts mattered. As Kwame grew more accustomed to the rhythm of this new life, he began to understand that the process of learning was not just about acquiring skills, it was about changing his perspective on himself. It was about seeing that he was capable of more than he had ever believed. And with each new skill he mastered, no matter how small, he was slowly stepping into a new version of himself. But the road was long. Each step forward brought new challenges, new questions, and new fears. The shadows of his past still lingered, and there were moments when the weight of them threatened to crush him. But through every struggle, Kwame held on to one truth: he was learning. And for the first time, learning felt like freedom. Kwame sat alone in his room that evening, the weight of the silence pressing down on him. The house, usually so warm and full of light, now felt foreign cold. He stared out the window, watching the sun set in the distance. The soft hues of the evening sky blurred into the familiar darkness that had become his constant companion. The tranquility of the moment did little to quiet the storm raging in his mind. For the first time since he had arrived at the professor's home, he allowed himself to think about the past. It was a past he had tried so hard to escape from, to bury under the newness of his life. But tonight, it was impossible to ignore. The memories came rushing back, flooding his mind like an overwhelming tide. He saw the old mango tree again, the one that had been his only companion for years. He could almost smell the earth, feel the rough bark beneath his fingers as he had written his thoughts on leaves, burying them beneath the tree. He remembered the weight of his loneliness, how he had clung to the tree, as though it was the only thing that kept him tethered to the world. But there had been no one else, no family, no comforting presence. Just the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves, the only sound that didn't mock him. Kwame squeezed his eyes shut, trying to shut out the memories, but they only grew stronger. He remembered the nights lying in the dirt, the nights he cried himself to sleep under the vast starry sky, wondering why no one came for him, wondering if he was truly invisible. He had been alone for so long that it had become a part of him, something he didn't know how to escape. He wasn't sure how to live without it. But now, here in this house, it was different. People were here. The professor and his family had welcomed him, shown him kindness and warmth. But somehow that only made things worse. The more kindness they showed him, the more Kwame felt like he didn't belong. He didn't deserve their generosity. He felt like an intruder in their lives, a burden they had taken on out of pity. They were giving him so much, and yet he couldn't stop feeling like he was stealing something from them. Their time, their energy, their love. He wasn't sure how to accept it, how to allow himself to feel worthy of it. Sitting in the quiet of his room, the weight of this guilt and shame crushed him. It felt suffocating, as if the walls of the room were closing in on him. He couldn't help but wonder if he was always going to feel this way, like he didn't belong, like he didn't deserve to be here. He wanted to be grateful, wanted to be happy, but it felt like there was something inside him, something deep that held him back from fully embracing this new life. It wasn't the professor's fault or the family's. It wasn't their love or their support that was lacking. It was something inside him, a piece of his past that wouldn't let go, that kept reminding him of his worthlessness. Kwame clenched his fists, a familiar anger bubbling up inside him. He didn't want to feel like this anymore. He didn't want to be haunted by his past, to feel like he was carrying a weight that he couldn't shake. But how could he let go of something that had been a part of him for so long? How could he move forward when every step he took was accompanied by the echoes of his loneliness and the voices that told him he wasn't enough? It was then that he heard a knock on the door. Kwame. The professor's voice, soft and gentle, floated through the wood. "Can I come in?" Kwame hesitated. He wasn't sure if he wanted to talk, if he was ready to face anyone, especially the professor who had given him so much. But something in the professor's voice, a tone of concern, made him nod silently. The door creaked open. and the professor stepped inside, closing it behind him. He didn't sit immediately. Instead, he stood by the window for a moment, watching Kwame with a quiet, almost thoughtful gaze. The silence between them hung heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence that allowed space for something unspoken. Finally, the professor spoke. "I noticed you've been a little distant these past few days. Is something bothering you?" Kwame didn't answer at first. His throat felt tight, his words caught in his chest. He didn't want to burden the professor with his feelings, didn't want to admit the depth of his guilt and shame. But the professor's presence was a steady anchor in the storm of Kwame's thoughts. And in that moment, he couldn't deny that he needed to speak. "I don't belong here," Kwame finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't deserve all this. You and your family have given me everything. But I feel like I'm just taking from you, taking more than I should." The professor remained silent for a moment, as though weighing Kwame's words carefully. Then he walked over to the bed and sat down beside him. His presence was calming, reassuring, as if he knew exactly what Kwame needed, even if the boy didn't fully understand it yet. "Kwame." The professor began, his voice low but steady. "I know it's not easy to accept help, especially when it feels like you haven't earned it. But you don't have to prove anything to anyone. You don't have to earn love. It's not about what you've done or what you think you deserve. It's about who you are." Kwame's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't wipe them away. He let the tears fall for the first time, feeling like maybe it was okay to feel this way, to not have everything figured out. "I don't know how to be someone else," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't know how to stop feeling like I'm nothing." The professor reached over and gently placed a hand on Kwame's shoulder, a gesture of warmth that felt like the first true comfort Kwame had known in a long time. "You're not nothing, Kwame. You're everything. You just have to give yourself the chance to see that." For a moment, Kwame sat in silence, the weight of the professor's words sinking in. He had always felt like he was living in the shadows, unsure of his place in the world, unsure of his worth. But now, in this quiet room with the professor beside him, he felt like he could take a deep breath, as if the burden had been lifted, even if just for a moment. "Everyone has a past, Kwame. Everyone has wounds, scars that they carry." The professor continued, his voice calm and steady. "I've had my own share of pain, my own struggles, and I know that it's not always easy to let go of them. But I also know that it's possible to heal. It's possible to move forward. And you don't have to do it alone. You have us now." Kwame didn't respond immediately. He was too busy processing the words, the weight of them pressing gently against his heart. The professor wasn't telling him to forget the past or to pretend it didn't exist. He was simply showing him that the past didn't have to define him, that it didn't have to control his future. "I'm here for you, Kwame," the professor said, his voice full of sincerity. "You don't have to carry that pain alone. You don't have to face it by yourself." Kwame nodded, feeling a flicker of warmth spread through his chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. Maybe with time he could start to heal. Maybe he could stop feeling like a burden. Maybe he could start believing that he was worth something, that he deserved love and happiness just like everyone else. The professor stood up, giving Kwame one last comforting look before he walked toward the door. "We'll take it one step at a time, all right?" Kwame nodded again, a small but meaningful gesture. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't alone. Like maybe he could begin to forgive himself, to let go of the past and move forward. And for the first time in a long time, Kwame felt a glimmer of hope. Kwame stood at the edge of the schoolyard, watching as groups of students walked by laughing and talking. The sound of their chatter seemed to echo in his ears, louder than anything he had ever heard. It was overwhelming. The whole school seemed to hum with energy, with life. And there he was, standing at the outskirts, a stranger in a world that didn't quite feel like his own. The professor stood beside him, his hand resting lightly on Kwame's shoulder, an encouraging gesture that somehow didn't ease the knot in Kwame's stomach. The nervousness that had been building inside him all morning was now at its peak. He had never been to school like this before. Back home, education had been a dream, something he could only imagine. But now here he was about to step into a real classroom, surrounded by students who seemed so sure of themselves, so at home in this environment. It was a world where Kwame felt like an outsider, a world where he didn't know the rules. "You'll do fine, Kwame," the professor said softly, his voice full of reassurance. "Just take it one step at a time. You're here to learn, and everyone is learning with you." Kwame nodded, but the words didn't sink in. His mind raced with self-doubt. What if the other students didn't accept him? What if he said something wrong? What if they laughed at him like he had been laughed at before? His thoughts spiraled into a whirlwind of uncertainty. And for a moment he considered running, walking away, and returning to the safety of the home where things were more predictable, where he knew what to expect. But then he remembered the past few weeks, the effort it had taken to even get to this point, the professor's patience, his encouragement, the way he had shown Kwame that learning wasn't just about knowledge, but about persistence. And so, despite the fear, Kwame forced himself to walk toward the building. Inside the classroom was even more intimidating. The students sat at their desks, some chatting, others reading, all seemingly at ease. Kwame felt his heart race again as the professor guided him to an empty seat. He sat down quietly, trying to make himself as small as possible, hoping that no one would notice him. The professor introduced Kwame to the class, and immediately all eyes were on him. Kwame felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. He was used to being invisible, to blending into the background, but here in this space, he was seen. And the weight of that gaze felt like it might crush him. The teacher began speaking, his voice calm and authoritative, but Kwame barely heard the words. His mind was too busy trying to figure out where he fit in, where he belonged in this room full of strangers. His gaze flitted from the teacher to the other students watching them as they took notes, whispered to each other, and responded to questions. It was so fast, so fluid. Everything seemed to be happening at once, and Kwame felt like he was falling behind, like he couldn't catch up. The lesson was about literature, a subject that was new to Kwame. He had never been taught this way before, with books, with discussions, with questions that required deep thought. Back home, education had been basic, focused more on survival than on the world of ideas. He had learned from the earth, from his environment, not from textbooks. The vocabulary the teacher used was unfamiliar, and the students' rapid exchanges made Kwame feel even more isolated. He felt like an alien in this new world, struggling to understand the language and the rhythm of this academic environment. But then something strange happened. The teacher paused and asked a question to the class. What do you think the author was trying to say about loneliness in this passage? Kwame had read the passage, though not as thoroughly as the other students. The words had seemed distant to him, like a story from another world. But there was something about the question that struck a chord deep inside him. He thought back to the nights he had spent under the mango tree alone, with his thoughts writing on leaves, burying his dreams in the soil. The loneliness that had filled his life, the emptiness he had never quite been able to articulate it, was all there inside him, just waiting to be spoken. Without thinking, Kwame raised his hand. He hadn't planned to speak. It was just an instinct, something in him that pushed him to respond. The room grew quieter as the teacher turned to him. "Yes, Kwame." The teacher said, his voice warm but expectant. Kwame's mouth went dry, and for a split second he hesitated. He felt the eyes of the class on him, and the weight of that attention threatened to swallow him whole. But then he took a deep breath, thinking about the many nights he had spent in isolation, thinking about the way the book had mirrored his own experiences. Slowly he began to speak. "I think loneliness. It's like being lost in a place where no one can find you," he said, his voice shaking at first, but growing stronger as he spoke. "It's like being surrounded by everything, but feeling empty. Like no matter how much you try to reach out, you can't get through to anyone. You feel like you're stuck in your own world and no one can understand you. The classroom was silent as he spoke. Kwame's words hung in the air, raw and honest. It was the first time he had ever shared something so personal, something so deeply connected to his own pain. He had never thought he could speak about it, not to anyone, not to strangers. But here in this classroom with the professor and these students, he had found the courage to say it out loud. When he finished, the room was still for a moment longer, and then the teacher nodded thoughtfully. "That's a very insightful perspective, Kwame," he said. "You've captured the essence of what the author was trying to convey. Loneliness can make us feel isolated, but it can also give us a deeper understanding of ourselves. Thank you for sharing that." Kwame's heart raced as the students turned their attention back to the lesson, but he felt something shift inside him. He had said something of value. He had been heard. After class, as the students began to file out of the room, one of the girls from the front row stopped by Kwame's desk. She smiled at him, her eyes bright with curiosity. "That was really good what you said about loneliness," she said. "I've never thought of it like that before." Kwame blinked in surprise. "You really think so?" "Yeah," she said, still smiling. "It was really powerful." For a moment, Kwame didn't know how to respond. The words felt too much to take in, too unreal. But as she walked away, Kwame couldn't help but smile to himself. Maybe, just maybe, he did belong here. Maybe he wasn't so different from these students after all. Maybe his voice mattered. Over the next few weeks, Kwame's confidence grew. Slowly, he began to participate more in class discussions. He would ask questions, share his thoughts, and even volunteer to answer when the teacher called on him. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when he felt like an outsider, when the pressure of being in a new world seemed overwhelming. But with each passing day, he felt more and more like he was becoming a part of this new life. The professor continued to guide him, offering gentle encouragement whenever Kwame needed it. He would remind him that learning wasn't just about getting the answers right. It was about engaging with the material, exploring ideas, and finding your own voice. And little by little, Kwame began to believe that his voice mattered. It wasn't just a whisper in the wind anymore. It was a voice that could be heard, a voice that could be understood. Kwame was no longer just the boy who had been left behind under the mango tree. He was becoming someone new, someone who could stand tall and speak with confidence. Someone who was starting to find his place in the world. And for the first time, he realized that he was no longer just surviving. He was learning to live. Kwame sat at his desk, staring down at the sheet of paper in front of him. The words on the page seemed to blur together, each question, feeling like a puzzle he didn't know how to solve. His heart raced as he looked around the room at the other students, all sitting with their heads bent in concentration, scribbling answers onto their own papers. They looked so calm, so confident. And there he was, stuck at the starting line, unsure of how to even begin. This was his first real test since arriving here. It was a big one, a literature exam, covering everything they had studied in class so far. The professor had encouraged him to take it, said it was a great opportunity for Kwame to show how much he had learned. But now that the test was in front of him, all Kwame felt was fear. The room was silent, except for the soft scratch of pens and pencils on paper. The ticking of the clock seemed louder in his ears than anything else, counting down the minutes, reminding him that he was running out of time. He glanced down at the paper again, but the words still didn't make sense. The questions were in English, a language Kwame had learned, but never quite mastered. He could understand it when people spoke slowly, but reading and writing in English felt like trying to catch smoke with his bare hands. He gripped his pen tightly, trying to steady his shaking hand. His thoughts raced. What if he didn't understand the question correctly? What if his answer was wrong? What if he couldn't express his thoughts in the right words, and they all laughed at him? The same old fears started creeping in, the ones he had tried to leave behind. the ones that had always told him that he wasn't good enough, that he didn't belong. Kwame's mind flicked back to the days spent under the mango tree, when his only concern had been finding enough food to survive. The tests of that life had been simple, but this was different. This was a test that would determine whether he could truly make it in this world, whether he could leave behind the loneliness and the struggle and build a new life here in a place that was so unlike his own. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside him. He couldn't afford to give up now, not after everything he had been through. He thought about the professor, about the way he had encouraged him to keep going, to keep trying even when everything felt impossible. "You can do this, Kwame," the professor had said. "You've already come so far. Now it's your time to show it." Kwame's eyes moved back to the test. He read the first question again slowly, trying to break it down. What is the central theme of the story? Discuss how the author conveys this theme through character development. It sounded simple enough, but Kwame had never been good at identifying themes in literature. And in English, it felt like a mountain. He wasn't sure he could climb. He could feel the pressure building, but instead of freezing up, he took another deep breath and began to write. Slowly, carefully, he translated his thoughts from his own language into the language of his new world. He didn't know if he was doing it right. He didn't know if his answer would make any sense at all. But he kept writing, pulling from the lessons he had learned from the books he had read, from the way the professor had shown him that the value of an answer wasn't always in perfection. It was in the effort to understand, to communicate, to engage with the material. Time ticked by, each second adding weight to his chest, but he continued to write. He paused only once to glance around the room. The other students were still scribbling away, but he didn't have the luxury of worrying about them. This test wasn't about them. It was about him. As the last few minutes of the exam ticked away, Kwame felt a surge of determination. He didn't know if he would pass. He didn't even know if his answers were right. But he did know one thing. He had done his best. He had fought through the doubts, through the fear, and he had completed the test, and that in itself felt like a victory. The bell rang, signaling the end of the exam, and Kwame handed in his paper. He stood up, his legs shaking slightly, but his heart felt lighter than it had when he first sat down. He had done it. As the class emptied out, Kwame lingered for a moment, waiting for the professor. When he approached, the professor smiled warmly at him. "How do you feel, Kwame?" Kwame hesitated, then answered quietly. "I don't know. I don't think I did very well. It was hard." The professor nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's always hard at first. But what's important is that you tried. You didn't give up. You faced the challenge head on, and that's something to be proud of." Kwame's heart lifted a little at those words. He wasn't sure what the result of the test would be, but hearing the professor's praise made him feel like maybe he was on the right path. The days following the exam were filled with nervous anticipation. Kwame couldn't stop thinking about the test. What if he had failed? What if all the effort he had put in hadn't been enough? Finally, the professor handed back the papers. Kwame's hands trembled as he opened his envelope, his heart racing. The paper was marked with red ink, some questions crossed out, others with notes written in the margins. But there at the bottom was a grade, a passing mark. Not perfect, but enough. Kwame stared at the paper for a long moment, unable to believe his eyes. He had passed. He had done it. Despite all the doubts, despite the struggles, he had made it through. The professor looked over at him, his smile gentle. "You did well, Kwame. I'm proud of you. This is just the beginning. You're learning and you're growing. Keep going." Kwame felt a lump form in his throat. He wasn't used to praise. He wasn't used to being told he had done something well. But in that moment, it felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He hadn't just passed the exam. He had proven something to himself, that he was capable of more than he had ever believed. As he left the classroom that day, Kwame felt something inside him shift. He had faced a challenge and come out the other side stronger, more confident. It wasn't just about the test. It was about everything he had learned along the way. The persistence, the resilience, the willingness to push through when things seemed impossible. And for the first time, Kwame realized that he wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. Every step, every challenge was taking him closer to the person he wanted to be. And that person was beginning to take shape, one test, one lesson, one small victory at a time. The letter arrived on a quiet morning, slipping under the door, like a whispered promise. Kwame had just finished his breakfast when the professor came into the kitchen holding the envelope in his hand, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Kwame, this came for you," he said, his voice a mix of curiosity and anticipation. Kwame's heart skipped a beat. The letter, an official-looking envelope with the name of the university in bold letters across the top, was all it took to make the world around him slow down. His hands shook slightly as he took it, the weight of the moment settling on him. He tore it open quickly, almost afraid to look, yet unable to stop himself. The words on the page blurred for a moment. He blinked and read again, slower this time, to make sure he wasn't imagining it. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been awarded a full scholarship." Kwame's breath caught in his throat. Full scholarship. To a prestigious university. A chance to continue his studies, to build a future beyond the boundaries of what he had ever imagined. It was the break he had been waiting for, the moment that would change everything. The professor stood beside him, watching quietly. When Kwame finally looked up, tears welled in his eyes. Not out of sadness, but from a deep sense of disbelief and gratitude. This wasn't just a letter. It was proof of everything he had worked for, everything he had struggled with, all the years of pain and isolation that had now led him to this point. I got in," Kwame whispered, almost as if he couldn't believe the words himself. His voice cracked with emotion, but there was also a sense of pride that he couldn't contain. The professor smiled warmly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You earned this, Kwame. You've worked so hard for this moment. I've watched you grow, and I knew you could do it." Kwame nodded, his mind swirling with thoughts. This was real. This was happening. The boy who had once sat under the mango tree dreaming of a different life had now been given a chance to live that life. A life filled with opportunities, a life where he could finally leave behind the shadows of his past and step into a world that was bright with promise. For the first time, Kwame truly felt the weight of what he had accomplished. It wasn't just the scholarship. It wasn't just the academic success. It was the journey, the transformation he had gone through, from the lonely boy who had written his dreams on leaves to the young man standing on the edge of a new beginning, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The days leading up to his departure were a whirlwind. There were documents to sign, preparations to make, and goodbyes to say. But through it all, Kwame remained focused. He had made it this far, and now the real challenge, the real opportunity, was just beginning. The world was opening up to him, and he was ready to step through the door. On the day of his departure, the professor stood with him at the front of the house, a heavy bag slung over his shoulder. Kwame looked at the house that had been his home for so long. It wasn't just a building. It was where he had found his strength, where he had learned to believe in himself. The professor had become more than just a mentor. He had become a father figure, a guide, and a friend. "You've come a long way, Kwame," the professor said, his voice filled with pride. "I'm so proud of you. But remember, this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. The world is yours now." Kwame nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected to feel so emotional about leaving, but standing there, ready to take the next step in his journey, made it all real. The past few years had been nothing short of transformative, and he wasn't the same person who had first walked into the professor's house. "I won't forget you," Kwame said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything." The professor smiled, his eyes soft with affection. "You don't need to thank me, Kwame. You've done all the work. Now go and show the world what you're capable of. As Kwame turned and walked toward the bus station, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. He wasn't afraid anymore. There was no turning back, but for the first time in his life, that didn't scare him. He had learned so much. He had grown so much. He knew that he wasn't the same boy who had arrived at the professor's house all those months ago. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. The bus ride to the university was long, but it gave Kwame time to reflect on everything that had brought him here. He thought about the mango tree, about the days he had spent alone writing his dreams on leaves. He thought about the first time he had entered a classroom, the first time he had shared his thoughts with others, the first time he had felt truly seen. He thought about the professor who had believed in him when he hadn't believed in himself. And now here he was on his way to a university that would open new doors, new possibilities. He had a scholarship, but more importantly, he had a future. The world had opened up before him, and he was ready to embrace it. As the bus rolled down the road, Kwame felt something shift inside him. The weight of his past, the pain, the loneliness. It was still there, but it didn't define him anymore. He had worked through it. He had grown stronger, more resilient. And now he was ready to step into a new world, one where he could create his own story. Kwame had come so far, but this was just the beginning. There was so much more ahead of him, so many lessons to learn, so many dreams to chase. And for the first time, he felt truly confident that he could achieve them all. He had the strength, the determination, and the heart to do it. He wasn't just a boy from a small village anymore. He was someone who could change the world. And as the bus pulled into the university, Kwame stepped off with his head held high, ready to take on whatever came next. He was no longer afraid. The world was his, and he was ready to make his mark.